Well now, are you settled? Welcome back to Celticism, your place to come to for ghost stories told in the dark. I'll just sit here beside your bed for a while the wind moves through the eaves. It's a cold one tonight, the kind that rattles the old windows and makes the rain whisper against the glass. The kind that makes you listen for things you shouldn't. Now, for our little trick. Don't close your eyes just yet, let them soften. Peer through your eyelashes and watch the room lose its edges. The shadows slide and merge until you can't quite tell what's real. Breathe slow, in through your nose, out through your mouth. And you'll find that the longer you try to stay awake, the sooner sleep will come. Loosen your jaw, let those shoulders fall, let your hands grow still and heavy at your sides. If you hear quiet footsteps stop outside your door, ignore them. If you feel the mattress dip, stay still. They only settle when you do. And when the morning comes, drop a comment, maybe tell me where you're listening from. Like, subscribe, and tell a friend who loves a ghost story before sleep. This is your place to come back to every night, to rest and to drift. And for now, let's begin. They started late, when the tide lapped at the bridge and the old tower across the water looked like a burned candle in the dusk. Frankie Flanagan came up the road with a carpet bag and the hopeful face of a man who'd packed too much belief. And Tommy Rowan walked 10 paces behind, hands buried in his coat, chewing on a cold roasted spud like it was keeping him warm. "Right," Frankie said, stopping under the archway. "Belvelly, 4 floors, arrow slits, draft like a curse. Are you ready?" Tommy looked at the black outline of the castle, then at the water, then at the spud. He shrugged. "Let's get it over with." Frankie smiled faintly. "And, thanks again for coming. A week's pints is a week's pints, after all." "That, and keep you out of the papers," Tommy said. They crossed the bridge, shoulders hunched against the wind, and shoved at the swollen oak door. It opened with a long, tired sigh. Inside was cold stone and older air. The first floor was a low chamber with a vaulted ceiling, straw rotting in one corner, and the wet smell of salt and soot. Frankie set down his bag like a doctor unwrapping his tools. Out came his ghost hunter's kit, a tin trumpet for catching voices, a glass plate for reflections, a candle, a pocket watch that lost time near spirits, and a wind-up recorder with a cotton horn. Tommy leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You've got enough gear there to fix a parish clock, you know." "It pays to be ready," Frankie said. He held the trumpet up, his voice soft as prayer. "If anyone can hear me, we mean you no harm. A sound, a sign, anything at all." They waited. The silence settled like dust. Somewhere a drip fell. The place seemed to hold its breath. Frankie squinted at the windows. Tommy finished his spud, wiped his fingers on his trousers, and gave a slow nod. "Nothing?" he asked. "Sometimes it just takes a bit of patience," Frankie said. "Well, you're in trouble, so." They climbed. The second floor had narrow loops that let the harbour air in like thread through a needle. Frankie marked the stones with chalk and muttered half-remembered history, sieges, marriages, and the woman they all still whisper about, Lady Margaret, said to have leapt from the tower when her husband betrayed her. He polished the glass plate until it shone dull silver and set it by the coldest draught. Tommy wondered. His eyes followed the walls, the cracked mortar, the shadows that pooled like ink. A glint caught his attention, something wedged deep behind a loosened stone near the stairs. He dug his fingers in and pried it free. A narrow-bladed dirk, dark with age, the iron hilt plain and sturdy. The handle felt colder than the wall itself. "Oh, would you look at that?" he murmured. "What?" Frankie didn't turn. He was listening to the recorder's soft ticking. Tommy weighed the blade in his hand, solid, balanced, the kind of thing made to last. He slipped it into his coat pocket and said, "Nothing worth shouting about." They moved on. The third floor was a long room with broken beams and mummified bird bones underfoot. A slit window framed the moon like a coin. Frankie stopped there, eyes bright. "There's something here. D'you feel that?" He wound the recorder again, dusted the floor with flour, and lit another candle. "Lady Margaret," he whispered, "if you're here, we're not here to mock you. We only want to understand." The candle flame trembled, but it didn't die. Tommy sat on a stone, chewing another spud wrapped in brown paper. "You know I have to be in Tipperary in the morning," he said. "I do. Market's early, and from what I'm hearing, the cattle won't last." "I know." Frankie smiled thinly and went back to his work. Tommy stared out the window, half listening, half gone. The hours dragged the way only ghostless hours can. Frankie broke the silence. "Do you ever think there's something beyond all this?" "Beyond what?" "This," he gestured around him. "Walls, graves, bodies, the bit that doesn't rot." Tommy gave a slow shrug. "If there is, it's their business, not mine." "You never saw anything you can't explain?" "I saw a man eat 6 boiled eggs at once in the pub. That was close." Frankie chuckled. "You hide it well, you know. Fear." "I'm not afraid," Tommy said. "Just bored." The line hung in the cold for a while, and then they both laughed, and it eased something between them. Frankie bent over the recorder again, asking gentle questions to the air. Tommy's eyelids drooped, the slow blink of a man too tired to care about ghosts. Frankie rummaged through the carpet bag again and came up with a small wooden board etched with faint letters. The sort of thing a child might carve into a school desk. Beside it, he laid down a stub of a candle and a pencil worn down to the last inch. "So what's this now?" Tommy mumbled. "It's called automatic writing," Frankie said, as if naming a sacrament. "The dead guide your hand." Tommy half opened one eye. "Is that so? Do they sign their name after or just scribble abuse?" "Just put your hand on mine," Frankie said. "I'd rather not," Tommy said. "Please, it helps the current." Tommy sighed, the sound of a man giving in to nonsense. He placed one larger hand over Frankie's trembling fingers. The candle guttered once, then steadied. For a long time there was nothing, just the scratch of the sea outside and the faint tick of the recorder still running. Then the pencil began to move. At first it was only a slow circle. Frankie's breath hitched. "Do you feel that?" "I feel you shaking," Tommy said. The pencil jerked again, harder this time, scraping a crooked line across the page. Frankie leaned closer, eyes wide. The circles became letters. M, A, R. Tommy frowned. "Mary?" Frankie swallowed. "Margaret." The pencil paused, then dragged itself once more, scrawling the rest in a single desperate motion. "Below." Both men froze. Tommy lifted his hand. The pencil rolled, tapping twice against the board like a fingernail on wood. Frankie stared at the word as if it might change. "Below." There's no cellar here. There's below us, Tommy said, and below that again. Frankie swallowed. Maybe she means, or maybe, Tommy cut in, she means you've gone and talked to yourself long enough. Frankie forced a laugh, shaking off the cold that crept into his hands. He closed the book, slid it back into the bag, and reached for another item, a small board with letters burned into its face and a glass tumbler for a planchette. He set it down between them. Let's try one more, he said softly. Tommy pinched the bridge of his nose. You're like a man knocking on the butcher's door after hours. Frankie ignored him, placed his fingers on the glass and waited. After a long silence, Tommy joined him. The glass trembled, began to move slowly in small, deliberate circles. Frankie whispered, Is someone here with us? The glass slid to Y. Lady Margaret? It hesitated, then scraped to Y again. Well, what do you want from us? The glass jerked hard, then spelt out letter by letter, Look up. The candle flame flickered high, smoke curling into the air. Tommy pulled his hand back. That's you. You win. Look, I'm done with this. Frankie stared at the board, the words still shining in fresh soot. The air felt heavier, as though the castle itself had leaned in to listen. Tommy rubbed his eyes, half asleep, half wary. So, what now? Frankie looked toward the stairway that curled upward into darkness. Let's just go up, he said at last. They climbed the narrow spiral, the steps worn like old teeth. At the top, the parapet glowed with moonlight. The tide below was black glass, and the lamps of the cove made a trembling line across the bridge. Frankie set his glass plate beside a small brass mirror from his bag. The two men sat against the inner wall, shoulders almost touching. The wind came straight off the sea, sharp enough to taste. Frankie turned the watch in his hand, studying its steady click. You ever think I'm wasting my life with this? He asked. Most days, Tommy said. Frankie laughed once. That's fair enough. He rubbed his hands together and sighed. You know, all this, no responses, all this work and nothing. Maybe there is nothing. Maybe I've spent years chasing weather and drafts. Tommy didn't answer. He stared at the mirror, half lost in thought. The night had gone still, so still it felt like the world was waiting. Then Frankie stiffened, his eyes fixed on the glass plate between them. In the blurred reflection, two dark shapes sat side by side. Behind them stood a third, tall, lean, the outline of a woman bent slightly at the neck. His knee brushed Tommy's. Tommy looked, saw it too. They turned, together. A woman at the edge of the parapet. Her hair hung in thick strands, heavy with seawater. The dress clung stiff and torn. Her face was pale and ruined, one side drawn up, the other side slack, as if she'd half forgotten how to be human. Moonlight poured around her, but none of it seemed to touch her. Tommy didn't flinch. He just blinked, slow as a man waking, and, "How are you now?" he said. Frankie's mouth dried. Lady Margaret." The ghost tilted her head, an old, deliberate motion creaking at the joints of memory. Her lips moved without sound. The candle flame between them flattened, then steadied again. For a moment, she seemed to study them both, eyes wide and endless. Tommy opened his brown paper bag and held it out and said, "Spud?" The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a snarl. She looked at the offered food, then at the man offering it. Her hand lifted slightly, a tremor of motion, and fell again. Frankie swallowed. "We see you," he whispered. You're seen. We just want you to know you're seen. For a heartbeat, the air tightened, as though every grain of night had drawn close to listen. Then the tension slipped. The figure lost its edges. The shape folded in on itself, threadbare, falling back into the cold it came from. They sat, still. The recorder had stopped, the watch ticked on. Frankie covered his face and laughed once, shaky and small. Tommy exhaled through his nose, looking at the empty parapet. Then he stood, stretching his back. Well, he said. Frankie looked up. You saw that, Tommy. Tell me you saw it. I did, he said. You saw her. I did. It looked like she'd had a bit of a bad swim, he said, shrugging. Frankie laughed properly this time. It sounded like relief. Thank you, Tommy, he said. For what? You know, for coming along. Tommy nodded, rolling his shoulders. Come on, before the tide takes the bridge. They packed the bag, took the stairs slow. On the ground floor, Frankie checked the recorder. The wax scored with a neat black line. He didn't play it. Some things are better left silent. Outside, the night had softened. Lamps flickered on the bridge. The air smelled of rain. They walked until the road split. Look, I'm going to head on, Tommy said. Tipperary won't wait. You heading straight from here? Frankie asked. Near enough. You'll be wrecked. I'll be grand. Frankie hesitated. Did we do it right, do you think? Tommy looked back at the tower, at the bridge, and at his friend. Well, we didn't do it wrong, Frankie, he said. He gave a lazy nod, turned the cart toward the pale horizon, and clucked the horse on. Wheels cracked the frost as he disappeared into the mist. Belvelly Castle kept its silence. The cattle market in Tipperary smelled of wet hide and churned mud. Ropes creaked, hooves scraped, men argued in tight circles and counted the same coins twice. Behind 3 barrels, by the low bridge, 3 children crouched in a wedge of shadow. What did you get? Whispered Paddy, the small one, opening his fists. Buttons rattled onto a scrap of sacking. Looked like silver, till I had them. Nell, the taller and all elbows, snorted, We'll feast well on those, so we will. Maeve, red shawl, sharp green eyes, turned out a few old crumbs. Nothing, she said, with the flat honesty of a girl used to it. Nell's grin came shy. He unwrapped a dirty rag and showed them a dirk. A narrow blade, aged dark hilt, the colour of old copper gone mossy. Under the grime lay faint lines like rubbed thin writing. Where did you get that? Maeve breathed. Some dry-arse-looking Cork boy, Nell said, pleased with himself, dragging his feet and eating a handful of potatoes. Paddy crossed himself. It's cursed. Maeve reached without thinking. Her fingertips brushed the hilt. Snap! A tiny green spark jumped to her skin. Another snapped to a mouse nosing crumbs by her boot. The mouse rolled, sat up, blinked around like it had misplaced the world, and squeaked in a voice as crisp as a bell. Mother of God, that stung. All 3 kids stared. Don't look at me like I've 2 heads, the mouse said, brushing its whiskers with its paw. I'm as shocked as you are. Paddy yelped and bolted. Nell swore choice words and ran after him. To hell with the knife, you keep it, Maeve, he called, gone already. Maeve and the mouse were left with the barrels, the dirk, and the market's rising din. She sat under the bridge arch where water ticked through moss. The mouse settled on her knee, breathing fast. There's power in that blade, it said, calmer now. The spark showed me things. Luchta's forge, fire under a hill where no smoke rises. That's where it was made. Luchta? Maeve asked. A smith of the old ones, said the mouse. His work cut things that shouldn't be hurt. Spirits, curses, wrongness. This dirk was hammered for trial more than war. Maeve turned the hilt, for a heartbeat faint green lines winked under the grime. The sight made something warm move under her ribs. My granny used to say we came from Nessa's line, she said quietly. Stories. She'd half convinced me then I'd grow up by morning. The mouse tilted its head. When you touched the hilt, your eyes went green. I saw it. If there's a way to prove what you are, the spark showed me it. 3 trials. You pass them. The blade is truly yours. Here, Maeve asked. In the yard? The mouse shook its head. No. Cheering an oak, the other side. You'll need a hawthorn. You stand by it, hold the blade out, and cut the air clean. That opens the rift. It tapped the hilt. The spark put the knowing in me. Don't ask me for page citations. A farmer's roar broke across the lane. Maeve O'Shea, you little rat. He strode down, red-faced, stick in hand. Nothing but trouble you are. You're not wanted around here. You're as bad as the plague. Off with you. Maeve kept her chin up. It still hurt. It always did. She wrapped the dirk back in its rag, scooped the mouse, and ran the back ways where adults rarely looked, along walls, over stiles, through gaps in gorse. They came to a hawthorn at the edge of a field, old and thorny, the way hawthorns like to be. The mouse hopped to the stone. Here, it said, stand close, hold the hilt out, and slice down. Maeve drew the dirk. The hilt warmed in her palm like a living thing glad of her hand. She held it forward, shoulders square, and cut down through empty air. The air opened. Green light spilled like smoke. The cut widened to a thin door. Beyond lay a world bluer than sky, greener than grass, and quiet in the way a chapel is quiet when no one speaks. Maeve swallowed. Right so. After you, said the mouse. They stepped through. The door sighed shut behind them. The air had a taste, sweet and sharp, and the light came from everywhere, not just above. Ahead rose a stack of stone, like a giant had piled it by hand, a high needle of cliff, narrow and steep, with a single tree clinging to its summit, roots knuckled into rock. A white thread of water spilled down one side in a silver veil. The mouse squinted up. The spark says your first trial is courage. Climb to the tree, cut a twig clean, don't break it, don't fall, and try not to die because it gives me nerves. Maeve stared at the height and her stomach did a small turn. That's very high. It is, said the mouse, but so are futures. Maeve tucked the dirk into her belt, spat on her hands, and set them to the stone. The climb began easy. There were ledges, narrow, but there. The rock was rough enough for fingers to grip. She found rhythm, right hand, right knee, left knee. The mouse scurried astonishingly with the style of a creature who has no business liking heights but likes Maeve. Halfway up, the wind changed. It came round the stack cold and fast, and it sang, not like wind in Ireland, but like voices thin and far. Maeve pressed flat against the stone, cheek to the grit. You all right? The mouse called, tucked under a lip with his whiskers pinned back. I'm grand, Maeve lied. She looked down. She shouldn't have. The ground lay far below, the hawthorn a dot, the field a green square on a quilt. Her head swam. Don't look where you could fall, the mouse said kindly. Look where you can put your hand. Maeve set her jaw. She looked up. There was a seam just within reach. She shifted, toes searching for purchase. Her fingers found the seam, then the next, then the next. The ledge gave under her left foot. Pebbles rattled down the face and fell for a long time. Maeve's breath went thin. She hugged the rock, forehead pressed to it. If I die here, she muttered, tell Nell he still owes me for that loaf. Noted, said the mouse. Also, just don't die here. The stone grazed her knuckles, blood brightened them. She kept moving. The higher she went, the stranger the light got, greener where it struck lichen, gold where it caught the water's veil. At the top there was a space no wider than a good table. The tree grew there, stubborn and beautiful, bark grey, leaves small and bright. Maeve pulled herself onto the ledge and lay panting, laughing at nothing. She stood on shaky legs. Sorry, she told the tree, which felt polite. I only need a bit. She drew the dirk. The leaf shadow on the blade blushed green. She chose a twig near the end of a branch, placed the blade clean, and cut it with one careful breath. The twig came away soft as a sigh. The wind that had been singing changed its tune. For a heartbeat, it sounded like clapping, or maybe that was just the blood in her ears. Either way, when she tucked the twig into her coat, the tree seemed, just for a blink, to bow. The climb down was worse. It always is. At the bottom, Maeve lay on the grass and watched the sky till her heartbeat remembered how to behave. The mouse sat on her shoulder like a medal. 1, he said. 2 to go. How do you think I did? Maeve asked. Messy, he said. Brave. Perfect. She grinned and wiped her knuckles on her skirt. Right, what's next? They walked into a forest that grew dark long before it grew thick, thick as a maze. Trunks stood narrow and grey, with bark like stretched skin that sometimes looked, if you glanced too quick, like faces. Frostless mist drifted near the ground, and things moved in it that left no prints. Trial too, the mouse said softly. Trust. The spark says hold the blade in both hands and let it guide you. Don't argue with it. Don't think you know better. That last one may be difficult for you. Maeve sniffed, but she took the dirk in both hands. The hilt warmed. A faint pull like a tickle ran up her arms. She closed her eyes. All right, she whispered. I'm yours. She moved. The blade led at a walking pace, turning her left or right in small, certain motions. When she sped up, it slowed her. When she slowed, it urged her. She didn't open her eyes. Root, the mouse said once, and the blade's tip dipped in agreement, and Maeve stepped over something knuckly beneath leaf mold without seeing it. Duck, the dirk whispered in her bones, no words, just insistence, and she bent as something long and pale swung across the path above with the sound of wet cloth. A branch brushed her hair, cold fingers stroked the back of her neck and lifted away. Disappointed, she kept moving. Something slithered alongside, sounding like silk dragged through water. Once a whisper came from very close, "Little rat." It had the farmer's voice and didn't. Maeve's hands tightened on the hilt. The blade's warmth pulsed once, calm as a hand to the shoulder. She breathed out and walked on. She stepped over a run of black water without seeing it. She sidestepped between 2 trees whose shadows were too thick for their trunks. A fox watched from a fallen log with eyes too green. The mouse hissed and it looked away. They passed a place where the air smelled like iron and hush. In the hush, far off, a harp sounded a few plucked strings. The tune didn't finish. The blade turned her away before curiosity could. Nearly there, the mouse breathed. Dead branches clicked together high above like teeth. Something moved in the canopy and dropped, fast, man-shaped, with too many elbows. The blade jerked Maeve into a crouch. The shape tore past where her head had been and hit the ground behind with a dry thud. It crawled into a rotted stump and didn't come out again. Maeve didn't open her eyes. She let the blade pull her around a thorn bank, through a narrow slit in two leaning trunks, and out. Light met her like warm hands. Grass spread at her feet. The forest whispered behind them and then pretended it hadn't. Maeve opened her eyes and laughed from relief. Her knees shook as if she'd been running. "Trust," said the mouse, hopping down. "You did it." "I thought I was fearless," Maeve said honestly. "Turns out I'm only stubborn." "That's half of courage," the mouse said, "and most of survival." They came to a well, not the kind with stones and a bucket, but a round mouth in the earth, rim smooth as a bowl. A breath rose from it, warm and not unpleasant and old. Far below, something glowed, green and gold, together like light through leaves and coins in a priest's plate. If you listened, there was a hum like a far beehive, and under it, no one's voice you knew saying your name. Maeve looked in and felt 10 years of wanting climb into her throat. "The third," said the mouse quietly, "sacrifice. Give up what matters most to you. Only then will the blade truly be yours." Maeve looked at her hands, at the scabs on her knuckles, at the dirk glinting faintly green, and at the picture the well made in its light, a girl with a blade and a future, walking into rooms where people went quiet, the kind of quiet that means respect. A girl who wasn't a rat or a plague, a girl who was somebody. "I have nothing to give," she said, and even she heard the lie. "No ring, no coin, nothing anyone would want." The mouse didn't answer. It watched her face. Maeve swallowed. She thought of every time she had been turned from a door. Every time she'd said, "It's grand," and known it wasn't. Every time she'd told herself she didn't care. The well hummed. The light below moved like breath. "What if what I have is want?" she said, almost to herself. "What if what I love most is the chance this is, the chance to be more?" The mouse's whiskers trembled. "If you know it, you know it." Maeve lifted the blade. It sat in her hands like it had been born there. The hilt was warm, familiar as her own name. She looked at the light and at the life she thought had promised, and then she let go. The dirk fell. It took an age to drop and no time at all, and the well's light caught it and made it a line. "Maeve," the mouse cried, paused to its head. "What did you do?" She looked down after it, eye stinging, heart too big for her chest. "I've just sacrificed," she said, and it was not dramatic, only true. "My only chance of being somebody." She closed her eyes because the well's light got too bright, and something touched her palm. Maeve opened her hand. The dirk lay on it, warm, green, sure, as if it had been resting there all along. She laughed once, and sound came out that was half sob, half joy. "Right," she said, wiping her face with the back of her wrist, refusing to make a show of it. "That'll do." The mouse blew out a breath. "Good God above," it said weakly. "Warn a fella next time." The well's hum softened like a lullaby finishing. The light slipped away down its own throat. The mouth and the earth looked like any other, dark and not dangerous at all, the way dangerous things often look after you have passed them. A breeze lifted Maeve's hair. It smelled like hawthorn blossom and iron and bread under a cloth. For the first time since she could remember, the quiet inside her felt full instead of empty. Are you ready to go home? The mouse asked. Aye, said Maeve. Home and whatever's after. They walked back the way they'd come. The forest watched and didn't touch. The faces in the bark looked less like faces and more like bark. The ravens followed a little way and then lost interest. At the first light of dawn, they found the hawthorn and cut the air again. The green door opened. They stepped through into an Irish morning with the frost so fine it made the fields glitter. Smoke rose from low chimneys. Someone shouted for a dog in a voice that sounded less angry than usual. Mouse? Maeve said as they reached the first stile. What now? The mouse hopped to the top stone and looked at the road as if it were a map. Now, it said, you'll keep walking, not because people will clap, but because walking is what you are made for. That's not an instruction, Maeve said dryly. That's a poem. All the important things are, said the mouse. Listen, you'll find doors like that hawthorn in places you wouldn't think. Old walls, lone trees, churchyards the tide forgets. If you feel your palm warm on the hilt and the air taste like green, step careful. It might be calling you, not anyone else. Maeve nodded. As for me, the mouse went on, smoothing its whiskers like a man straightening a tie, I think I'll see the south, stretch the legs. Kinsale is meant to be nice this time of year. I'll judge the stew and the gulls and report back if I remember. Maeve laughed. Good luck with you, so, you mad little thing. And to you, Maeve of the green eyes, said the mouse, don't forget what's in your blood. It tipped and a visible cap slid down the far side of the stile and vanished into grass with the confidence only small creatures and brave girls have. Maeve walked on. The dirk sat easy at her belt. The twig from the high tree rose safe in her pocket like a secret. She passed the yard where men were already telling each other improved versions of yesterday. The same farmer spotted her, his mouth thinned like string. You again, he said, contempt comfortable on his tongue. You'll never amount to anything, girl. Off with you. Maeve looked at him. She didn't feel like spitting. She didn't feel like shrinking. The green in her eyes caught the morning for a heartbeat and threw it back brighter. All right, she said and smiled. Good luck with your day. She turned away, not because he told her to, but because the road was waiting. She passed the cracked mirror propped on a crate. In it, she saw a girl who looked like her and exactly like someone more. If you had stopped her and asked who she was, she might have said, Maeve. If you had asked again softer, she might have added, and I'm not alone. She went on. The lane stretched. The fields breathed. Somewhere far off, a hawthorn stirred for no wind at all, and if you listened close, you could hear a blade hum the faintest note, content and ready, and that was enough. Night pressed heavy over the ruin beyond Bandon. The moss shifted. A thick hand pushed up through the soil, the fingers dark, layered like rough bark. It searched along a rotting shelf until it found a grey cap. The hand lifted it, turned it once, and clenched. Cloth gave a soft crunch. The shape crouched there, breathing slow. It reached for what the ruin still held, a limb of yew, a shard of black flint, a coil of briar pulled wet from the wall. The hands worked steadily, flint bound tight to yew, stone wedged firm into a crook of wood, briar plaited into a whip. When the tools were done, the creature bent over a patch of pale sap bubbling from a cluster of toadstools. It dipped the spear point, the axe edge, and each thorn of the whip into the milky stuff until it ran clear down the shafts. The air filled with the sweet, rotten smell, the kind that turns the stomach. It rose, filling the doorway. Moss hung from its ribs. A tangle of antlers brushed the stone arch. In one hand it held its new weapons, in the other, the crushed remains of the cap. It tightened its grip. The last of the cloth sifted away on the wind. "Kira!" The shout shook the quiet house above Bandon. "Where's my hat? My good cap, the grey one?" I'm nearly sure I left it on the hook, sir," came the maid's voice from the kitchen. Prunchis O'Riordan checked the pegs by the door and found only coats. He frowned, pulled on his boots, and took the rifle from its place by the dresser. The yard outside glowed silver in the moonlight. Lamps from the house threw gold on the white walls. Beyond that, his fields, trimmed, fenced, and his alone. A mouse darted along the skirting, vanishing behind the flour bin as the door shut. It had been a good day. He had come back with a cartload of kills, stoats, crows, and a fox that had been taking hens. They hung in a neat row from the beam in the cart shed. He liked order, a clean field, no vermin. He ate, washed, banked the fire, and climbed to bed. The clock ticked. The ash settled. The dogs gave one low bark and went still again. A sound woke him, a sharp bark outside, quick and close. He knew the tone, a fox, right under the hen house. He swung his legs out of bed, buttoned his coat over his pajamas, and reached for the rifle. The latch clicked softly. Cold air rolled in as he opened the door. Frost shone on the gravel. Breath steamed white. The bark came again, out past the wall. He crossed the yard, boots crunching, and stepped through the gap toward the lower field. A mouse paused on the doorstep, whiskers twitching, then slipped back inside. At first, the ground felt normal, hard underfoot, ruts clean from the cart wheels. The river glinted to his right. The fox barked again, faint but clear. He followed the sound down the track, across the stile, and into the fringe of the woods. The cold deepened between the trees. He steadied his rifle against his hip. The barrel caught the moonlight, a silver line moving with his breath. Under the bank, the ground shone with clusters of toadstools, red caps with white spots, hundreds of them, bright as spilled paint. He frowned, but kept walking. The path tightened. Brambles scraped his sleeves. He lifted an arm to push through, and something whipped out of the darkness and caught his forearm. A fast, hot sting cut across his skin, slashing him. He swore under his breath, rubbed at it, and felt a thin, wet heat spreading beneath his palm, a burn that wasn't fading, bleeding. He shook his hand, wiped the blood on his coat, and pressed on down his path. He stopped after 20 paces. The trees ahead seemed thicker than they should be. Sound travelled oddly here, too flat, too far. He lifted the rifle and took aim down the lane. Nothing. Then a small patch of bark moved, just a breath, just enough to notice. 2 green glints blinked once and vanished. He blinked too. Only a tree again. A mouse perched on a root, watching him, then slipped into a hole. He remembered an old story his father used to tell. Far Gorta, the hungry man who walked the fields when the land had been wronged. He gave a small snort at the thought and kept the rifle high. Somewhere ahead, something shifted, slow and deliberate. The sound came again, not bark this time, more like a low scrape, something heavy brushing through branches. He raised the rifle higher. The night around him seemed to hold its breath. A flicker to his left. He turned just as a limb of briar slid across the path, quiet as a snake. Before he could step back, it snapped tight. The thorns raked his sleeve and flesh together, leaving a bloody line. The pain was sharp and bright. Then came the heat, the same burning rush that had crawled up his arm before, now climbing to his shoulder. The trees seemed to move with it. Their lines bent, their bark shivered. Every color in the woods turned one shade too bright. He tried to focus on the next step, on anything solid. A trunk in front of him, folded, open, not broke, opened. The wood peeled away, revealing shape underneath, a shoulder, a chest, the curve of a horned head. A body stepped out, dragging the forest with it, as if it were a part of the trees. It was tall as Pranchis himself, built like a man but made of bark and stone. Moss draped the ribs, stone dotted its arms like growths. Its antlers brushed the branches. The beard hanging from its jaw looked like green wire. In one hand it carried the spear of yew, the tip still shining with the milky sap. Across its back, the axe. At its belt, the briar whip, thorns pointed, glistening. The smell of sap filled the air again, sweet, rotten, dizzying. Pranchis fired. The shot cracked through the trees, smoke rolled back in his face. The creature shifted one step aside. The bullet tore bark off a trunk and vanished. "Stay back," he barked. The figure didn't move. Pranchis worked the bolt, chambered again, but when he lifted the sight, the thing was gone. Only trunks, only silence. A whisper behind him, the hiss of the whip. He spun, too late. The thorns ripped through his coat, across his back this time. Heat surged in, liquid and fast. His vision blew wide open. Shapes leapt out of the dark. Fox, crow, hare, each one standing too tall, staring with the stillness of statues. The field itself seemed to breathe under him. He ran. Branches grabbed at him. Roots rose where the ground should have been smooth. He fired once more and saw the flash eat the bullet before it reached anything. He broke through a line of ash into open air and stumbled into a hollow. Mud stuck at his boots. He pushed up and slipped again. Behind him came the sound of something heavy, stepping slowly, never rushing. He looked back. Nothing there, only trees. A movement ahead. The creature was already waiting. It stepped out from one of the trunks, the wood closing behind it like water. The axe came off its back and struck the ground near its feet. The impact shook the dirt. Pranchis fell back, scrambled for the rifle, and found it soft in his grip, warped as if soaked through. He dropped it. It sank a little into the soil and stayed. The air shimmered. He could smell the toadstool sap again, stronger now, mixed with something like burnt moss. He backed away, breath ragged, but the figure only followed one pace at a time, spear in hand. The flint point gleamed pale green. Pranchis felt the ground under him pulse once. His head cleared just enough to remember his father's story. The Faragortha, the hungry man who came when a farmer took too much from the land. The figure stopped close enough that he could see his own reflection in the wet flint tip. He thought of Kira's voice. "I'm nearly sure I left it on the hook." He thought of the tidy row of kills, of the fox he'd hung by the tail. He thought of the pelts. He thought of his missing cap. The spear touched the center of his chest. Warmth spread out from it like a second heartbeat. Then everything went still. The next morning, the back door stood open. Kira's voice echoed through the yard, calling his name. The dogs whined but wouldn't leave the threshold. A mouse ran the length of the skirting and slipped behind the bucket. By noon, men from the next farms were walking the fields, calling, searching the hedges. They found the rifle first, sunk into the ground upright as if planted. Farther on, in the stand of ash, they found the rest. A pale flesh hide hung from a low branch, stretched and square, pinned by thorns, broad at the shoulders, narrowing at the waist, the shape and height of a man they all knew, a man named Proncius. In the grain of the skin ran a faint line like a collarbone. Drops of red slid off the edges and pattered on the roots below. On the ground, folded neatly, lay a grey cap, and beside it, a mouse sat washing its paws. No one spoke. They stood until they could make sense of what little they could. Then one man bent, took the cap, and they left the rest. When frost comes early, some say a pale, fleshy sheet still hangs in that ash stand. If you wait, you might hear a voice calling down a hallway for his good cap. If you keep listening, you'll catch a tiny rustle close to your boots. Nothing much, just a mouse. And sometimes, when the hedges meet over the lane, a fox barks and small lights answer from places that never held lamps. Then the field breathes, and the hedges breathe, and the old keeper of the field walks again, yew wood spear in hand, stone edge axe on his back, briar whip at his side. In the tangle of his antlers, caught like a leaf that never falls, hangs a scrap of grey cloth. The road into Bandon lay pale under the moon, the frost catching in every rut. Frankie Flanagan came along with his carpet bag bumping his leg and a chill in his bones that no coat could keep out. He'd been hired, by letter no less, to look into disturbances at the house of Miss Kira McAnally, lately of the O'Riordan estate. The letter had promised a week's board and a small wage. It had also promised no danger of any real kind, which was usually the surest sign that there would be. The house sat alone beyond the bridge, 2 stories of grey stone, half farm, half manor. One window still had candlelight. When he knocked, a woman's voice answered from inside. "Just a moment, please, just a moment." She opened the door a crack. Her hair was pinned, her face careful, as if she had practiced being calm. "Mr. Flanagan." "That's me," Frankie said, tipping his cap. "You wrote about the noises." "I did," she said. "Thank you for coming." The hall smelled faintly of lavender and something sharper beneath, like singed straw. She led him to the kitchen where the range burned low. A single chair sat by the hearth. The rest of the room looked tidied too often, corners polished thin. "You live alone?" he asked. "I do now." She poured tea with a steady hand. "This house, you see, was left to me by my late employer, Proncius O'Riordan. You may have heard the name." Frankie nodded. "Ah, the hunting man, the farmer. And a hard one," she said, eyes on the fire. "He had no family left, no kin worth the name, and when he took ill, he signed the place to me after years of work and patience. Frankie caught the pause but didn't press it. Kira looked up suddenly. "You've dealt with these matters before, have you?" "I did, back in Belvelly Castle," he said. "You'll have to tell me what's been happening." "At first it was small things," she said. "Voices in the walls, a smell of sap in rooms where there shouldn't be, and then—" She hesitated. "And then these stains." She showed him. Down the scullery wall ran a narrow vein of resin-hardened amber pale. Where it met the floor, the flags were white with frosts that hadn't melted all day. She knelt and touched it with a cloth. "See, it seeps back from nowhere," she whispered, "and it grows back when I clean it." Frankie crouched, rubbing the frost between his fingers. "Ah, cold under the stone," he murmured, "like something drawing the heat down." She straightened. "I've prayed over it, I've kept lamps lit, and still it comes." He noticed a grey cap hanging neatly from a peg by the door. "That's your husband's?" "No," she said, too quickly. "It belonged to Mr. O'Riordan. I keep it out of respect." Frankie gave a small nod, though the air near the cap felt heavier than respect. That night he took the spare room upstairs. The sheets smelled faintly of soap and mould. He unpacked his instruments, candle, watch, notebook, and set them on the sill. Wind worried at the glass. Sometime after midnight, the house began to breathe. Not the sound of timbers settling, a true breathing, slow, heavy, drawn from the walls themselves. The sound thickened near the skirting. When he lifted the candle, he saw the frost creeping again, tracing the floorboards. He followed it downstairs. The kitchen lamp still burned, but the flame leaned sideways. Across the wall, by the range, something moved beneath the plaster. Not a shadow, but a shape trying to remember one. Long fingers pressed through and vanished again, leaving wet marks like sap. Frankie swallowed hard. "Mrs. McNally?" he called softly. No answer. The grey cap still hung on its peg. For a moment he thought it trembled as if stirred by breath. Then the candle hissed out, and he was left in the dark that felt thick enough to touch. He relit the wick with shaking hands. The wall was dry, frost gone. Only the smell of sap remained, sweet and cloying. By morning, Kira looked as if she hadn't slept at all. "You saw it, didn't you?" she said. "I saw something," Frankie admitted. "Your wall's alive one minute and quiet the next." She gave a faint, strained smile. "It happens mostly at night, around the same hour he died." "How long ago?" 3 months. She set bread and tea before him. "They said he was found in the lower fields. Skinned. Animals, they thought. But the men who buried him said the skin was pinned up like a sheet, neat as a tanner's work." Frankie stopped chewing. "And you still live here?" "It's mine now," she said flatly. "Where else would I go?" The next nights were worse. Objects shifted in silence, the ledger left open though no one had touched it, footprints in ash that led nowhere. Once he woke to the faint crack of hooves on stone, though there was no horse in the yard, and the smell of sap grew thicker, mixed with the faintest hint of burning fur. He kept his notes, trying to stay calm, until the third night, when the mouse appeared. He had been sitting at the table, writing by lamplight, when a grey shape ran across the floor and stopped by his boot. It looked up, whiskers twitching, eyes sharp as beads. "Evening," it said. Frankie went still. "Sorry, what?" "Evening," repeated the mouse. "You're the new lad, I take it. Ghost chaser." Frankie blinked twice. "Either I'm asleep or I've gone mad." "Neither," said the mouse. Name's not important. I was here before you, before her, before the cap on that wall, and I'd advise you to pack your bits and run before the sun sets again." Frankie leaned back slower. "You know what's haunting her." "I do," said the mouse, "and she does, though she'll not say it. The thing that walks these floors was called by a gift, a cap left at a stile, spoken over with words that weren't prayers." Frankie felt the chill rise up his spine. "Wait, she called it?" "She called him," the mouse said. "The fair Gortha, the hungry man of the fields. He comes to those who feed the land and to those who starve it. Or Reardon bled his ground dry. She thought to set the debt right and make a bargain of it." "What kind of bargain?" "Power, freedom, the house itself." The mouse's tiny claws clicked on the table. "But you don't buy off hunger. You only invite it closer." From the hall came a dull creak, like a footstep on boards that shouldn't take weight. The mouse's ears flicked. "Too late to run tonight. You'll hold till morning." "And then?" "Then I'll call someone who'll stand against it," said the mouse. He climbed onto the windowsill, sniffed the air, and gave a low whistle, barely more than a breath. His eyes glowed faint green in the lamplight. "Old friends answer old debts." Frankie stared. "Who are you calling?" The mouse smiled in a way that only something ancient and small can. "Help," he said, "or trouble, depends which side you're on." The whistle hadn't faded when the wind in the yard changed. It didn't rise or fall. It turned as if a door had opened where there wasn't one. Kira appeared in the doorway in her shawl. "A talking mouse," she said, voice thin. "And what's the talking mouse saying?" "Buying you a little time," the mouse said. "Don't waste it." Frankie stood, heart thudding. "So what's coming?" Before the mouse could answer, a seam of pale light cut the darkness beyond the window. It widened like a slit in canvas. Through it stepped a black mare, steam ghosting from her nostrils. In the saddle was a young woman in a travel-stained coat, hair tied back, eyes green as sea glass. A heavy burlap sack hung from the pommel tied with cord, dripping with blood. Inside, an old puka's head. She swung down, landing light, and glanced over the yard, then at the house as if measuring it for weight. The seam closed behind her with a quiet sigh. "Good evening, Maeve," said the mouse. "Good evening," she answered, voice calm. "He's been here already?" "Close," said the mouse. Frankie stared. You came out of... "A door that isn't for you," Maeve said gently. Then to Kira, "So you're the lady of the house?" "I am," Kira managed. Can you stop it?" Maeve's glaze slid over the skirting, the frost in the cracks, the thin amber beads that had found their way back through the plaster. She breathed in, her jaw tightened a fraction. "We'll see what we're facing. Stay behind me and do exactly as I say." She drew her narrow dirk. In the lamplight, its edge caught a soft green sheen. The lamp flame bent, then leaned sideways as if pushed. A fine white ran along the floorboards and under the door like milk poured thin. From the scullery wall came a low crack, then a longer one. Sap bled through in beads. "Out," Maeve said, already moving. "It wants the field." They went into the yard. The cold air hit their teeth first. Grass whitened under the moon as though a hand were smoothing frost over it. Beyond the wall, the hedges stood too still. At the break in the hedge, something taller than a man unfolded from the dark and stood, Antlers, bark for ribs, long limbs woven like roots. The breath of it smelled of damp wood and old wheat gone bad. The Fargortha stepped forward. Its eyes had no whites, yet they watched. Maeve moved to meet it. "Keep low," she told the others. "If it comes for you, run and don't look back." The spear came fast, U-shaft, flint point dull with toadstool sap. She slid aside, cut at the haft, felt the jolt up her arm when the dirk met wood that rang like iron. The briar whip snapped, thorns kissed her forearm and stung hot. She pulled free and kept coming. She went low under the next sweep and drove the dirk up beneath the thing's ribs. Light leaked out, green, white, cold as moon on water. The Fargortha lurched. The spear butt slammed her shoulder and sent her skidding across the white grass. Frankie half rose. "Maeve!" "Down!" she barked, already up again, blade high. The field seemed to move with the creature. Where it stepped, the frost didn't spring back. Hedges clicked thorn to thorn like teeth. Maeve fainted right, then left. The spear plated the air where her head had been. She took the blow on the flat of the dirk, twisted and chopped. A strip of bark tore loose. The whip came in. She cut its tip clean, white sap sprayed and steamed. The Fargortha's head tilted toward Kira, as if scenting something more important than the fight. Then, without a sound, it stepped backward into the hedge and was gone. The frost held. "It'll mend," Maeve said, breathing hard. "It knows her." "Knows me how?" Kira's voice had a thread of anger in it now. "I've done nothing." Maeve said nothing. She was listening, not to them, but to the lines of the ditch, the slow push of cold in the grass. Frankie looked from the hedge to the house and made a decision. "Stay here," he said, and ran for the kitchen. "Lad," called the mouse, "don't." But the door had already slammed behind him. Maeve stood at the gap, blade low, eyes on the dark, as if she could see where the next foot would fall. Kira hugged herself and stared at nothing. "Why is it after me?" Kira asked, not moving her gaze. "Because a door was opened and it remembers who opened it," Maeve said. "But Kira swallowed. I didn't mean harm." "Meanings don't carry far in winter," Maeve said, "but deeds do." The mouse said nothing. He sat on the trough's edge, whiskers forward. Frankie came back, fast, breath showing. He carried a ledger and a bundled length of fabric. He dropped both on the stones by the trough. The fabric unrolled, a fur-lined scarf, pale and new. Another length slipped free after it. The ledger lay open on a page of neat receipts. "Crates in the attic," he said, flushed. "From the merchants over the river there, all recent. You've been buying them by the dozen, Kira. Furs from the woods." "But they're mine," she snapped. "I paid. It's no one's business." Maeve lifted the scarf. Under the smell of dressing and new leather lay Kira's soap, the faint run of her perfume, the warm trace that belongs to a person and no one else. Maeve's face didn't change. She only nodded once, as if a line and a sum had finally balanced. The mouse looked at Kira. Tell them the rest." "There is no rest," Kira said, eyes bright. Prunchies, he promised me this house for years. Then he took it back just to watch me squirm. I asked for fear on him, only fear to bring him to heel." "You left his cap by the stile," the mouse said, voice flat. "I saw you spoke his name to the hedge, you gave hunger his mark." Kira flinched. "I only wanted him frightened, I only wanted what was mine." Maeve turned the scarf in her hands, held it to the air and breathed once. "You learned from him," she said softly. "You took from the same field, just a different skin. And that's why it's come back. Not for the cap, for the coats." A sound moved through the hedges, not wind, weight. Frost braided itself in a thin white rope from ditch to trough. Get back, Maeve said, and stepped forward to meet it. The Fargortha rose without breaking a twig. It had mended where she'd cut it. Sap shone fresh at the seams. It looked at Maeve, then past her to Kira, and stilled, as if listening to a hunger older than either of them. Maeve walked 3 paces into the grass, set the scarf down on the frost, and stepped away. This carries her scent, she told the creature, voice level. This is between ye. She didn't raise the blade, she didn't lower it either. She only left the path clear. The Fargortha bent. Its long fingers lifted the scarf as if it were something living. It drew the fur to what passed for a face. The whole field leaned toward that breath. Maeve, Kira whispered, please, don't. Run if you like, Maeve said, not unkind. It won't matter. The briar whip moved first, quick as a thought. It looped Kira's ankle and pulled. She hit the ground. The whip slid higher, thorns finding cloth, not yet tearing, only holding. The spear came up and paused, flint point hovering at her breastbone. Frankie took a half step. The mouse put a paw against his boot. No, Kira's voice broke. I only wanted a decent life. Then you should have fed the hungry, the mouse said, soft as a prayer, instead of the hunger. The spear touched cloth. Frost ran from that point through the fabric like cold ink through water, branching, finding seams. Kira arched once and went slack. The hedges gave a small click as if teeth had met and held. Silence came down so fully that the fall of a single ice grain sounded loud. Maeve waited one more breath, then slid the dirk away. It's done. The Fargortha stood still, as if listening to the earth to a sound only feels here. Then it turned, stepped backward into the hedge, and was gone. The white grass stayed white a little while, then began to thaw as if warmed from underneath. They went into the kitchen together. Smoke had blackened the chimney mouth. The crack in the scullery wall oozed one last clear bead and stopped. Kira lay by the doorway, eyes open, frost marks fading already. In one hand she still clutched a shred of grey wool. Maeve closed her eyes with 2 fingers. She didn't touch the wool. Leave that, she said, almost to herself. It's not for us. Frankie stood with his hands useless at his sides. Will it come again? Not for her, Maeve said. Books are balanced. And you? He asked, because it felt wrong not to. Wherever I'm called, she said, a little tired, there's always another door. The mouse climbed the saddlebag when they reached the yard, settled himself with a small sigh. I'll keep the notes, he said. You, boy, write the simple truth, but don't put poetry on it. It doesn't need it. Frankie managed a thin smile. Well, I'll try. Maeve mounted. The mare turned towards the lane as if it knew the way. At the gate, she looked back once at the house, then gave Frankie a nod that held something like respect in it, and was gone, hoofbeats crisp on thawing frost, the figure of horse and rider folding into the pale morning. Frankie stood a while with his notebook open and pen hovering. When he finally wrote, it was only 3 words. The house breathed. He shut the door and went inside to tidy what he could. By habit or mercy, he straightened the pegboard as he passed. The grey cap hung there again, brim turned outward, ordinary as cloth, as if it had never been the start of anything. Later that week, the men came from the parish. They didn't say much. You don't on days like that. They lay Kira out quiet and straight, and the priest said a few soft words, and someone closed the door behind them without wanting to. The frost left the fields early that spring. Hedges put on a green nobody could remember seeing the year before. And now and then, when the wind ran the long grass at the stile just so, a low breath answered from the hedge, a breath like a field remembering it was hungry and then remembering it had eaten. In the hall of the O'Riordan house, the grey cap stayed on its peg, still as a held picture. Sometimes it stirred a little when a door opened. That was only draught, surely, only air. But on certain evenings, very late, in the kind of quiet that happens after you've said good night and blown the lamps, if you stood and listened, you might have heard a faint, tired whisper move through the rooms, not unkind, not angry, simply true. The field remembers. And then nothing at all, just a house, breathing. If you enjoy tonight's stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And when you wake up in the morning, leave a quick comment. It really helps this fireside grow. And come back every night for more ghost stories told in the dark. Until then, good night.